Lisa.
Okay, so as a board member of an organization that gets a lot of our funding from government sources, I'm really intrigued. So how is this an opportunity?
So, I don't think this is on. Probably hear you. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So it is a time of opportunity, and I don't want to be Pollyannish about it, but policy change happens, and regulatory change, at least as it relates to nonprofits, seems to happen with greater frequency in tough economic times. So I'll give one anecdote, and then we can talk about its general applicability. But there's an organization that I work with called Youth Villages, and it is in the child welfare juvenile justice system. Works with kids that are not, that are either not in safe homes or are themselves not safe when they're living in their homes and communities. And it, because of its focus on outcomes, adopted a very different approach that was not the approach that was embraced by its government funding. So they focused on intensive in-home services versus residential services, had lots of data about efficacy, was more cost-effective, etc. And for years made no headway. When their state they were operating in had to cut their department's budget by over 20%, they actually approached the state government and said, how about you cut our funding by 20%, but give us the same number of kids, but in this case, give us freedom for how we serve them and measure us by outcomes. And frankly, the government, I think at that point, now the government in Tennessee is by far leading in this in the country. I don't think the government was actually attracted to the outcomes argument, except insofar as it meant, that they felt safe the kids weren't going to get hurt and there wouldn't be a scandal. But it was the dollars that appealed to them. So I just think that if outcomes are superior but costs are the same, there's not necessarily an opportunity in these times. But if there's a financial efficacy argument, it can get hurt in these times much more so than in other times.
You're talking about Youth Villages.
Yeah.
Yep.
The other comment, though, I would add on that is that there are certain types of activities that are already viewed by the government as a core responsibility, whether it's at the federal, state, or local level, right? So kids in the foster care system, every state has a system like that. So in tough economic times, the question is, how can we survive? Do we make changes, et cetera? There's an openness to change. There are other activities that are not yet embraced as core responsibilities of the government. So early childhood education, by and large, right? There's not universal early childhood education. After school services, there's some states, some cities doing interesting things there, but it's in no way universal. I suspect in these economic times, absent some of the specific federal efforts, it's probably harder to push those than things that are already core.
Great question, great answer. Who else?
Can you comment about breaking out of the cycle? Lots of organizations have, whatever their budget is, 200, 500, $1.5 million, and they have enough to do what they're doing and they're successful at it, but everybody's going 120% of the time. So the question is, to have greater impact, they need to dedicate more time and resources to raising more funds so they can get to that next stage. But dedicating more time and resources meaning they're not executing the work. So there's that cycle of maybe it's positive because they're in the black, but they're really not growing. How do you, and that's all about capacity. How do these organizations break that cycle and grow to the next level?
I mean, I think it's a couple of things, and this is where SVP can play such a critical role. But there is an element where simply getting some supplemental funding, some extra backing, makes a huge difference. So you can't just discipline yourself out of having a negative margin, right? So in almost all of the success stories of organizations that have built really strong capacity and have built what I would call primary funding sources into a really strong, scalable model, there are critical secondary sources that they have gotten, often foundations and wealthy individuals. So that's the one part of the equation. You do have to find those. But then the second part of the equation is that both the funder and the nonprofit need to be disciplined about what it's spent on, because there's just an untold number of examples where that money is spent the same way the primary source of money is spent, as opposed to whether it's research studies, hiring a key staff member, that's above and beyond, building your capacity ahead of the services just a little bit. I mean, it really is what you spend it on.
I think I've heard you say a few times, correct me if I'm wrong, that there actually are stages of, you know, really small, kind of small to medium, and then I really want to get big.
Yeah.
And there actually is a phase in there where diversity of funding is a good thing to kind of get me from small to medium. It's if I want to go from medium to like really get up there, then I got to go focus on one because I don't have the competency, and I can't just spread my resources so thin to say I'm going to go after governments and foundations and individuals and all of it. Correct?
No, absolutely. There's when we have done studies, and we've done these in youth services and environmental advocacy, you actually see a U-shaped curve where organizations, and the U-shaped curve is by level of concentration of funding. So in their earliest stage of life, organizations that are, say, $1 million or less in size tend to be highly concentrated, in large part because they've gotten their start with one, you know, key champion or sponsor, whether it's a foundation or set of individuals, and it's typically pretty heavily foundation at that point, or wealthy individual. And then as they grow, they tend to diversify. So they succeed at landing their first, corporate funder, their first government contract, etc. And again, at smaller sizes, south of $5 million, there are plenty of pilot programs and different kinds of things that are available for a relatively wide range of activities. And then there are different breakpoints where they become concentrated again. It depends on the domain, that there are patterns. But it's at that middle stage where you start succeeding, you have a little bit of data, you have a little bit of program result, and you begin to attract a couple of other funders. It's getting some of them, frankly, to be